Hello, and welcome to the Veterans Voice. My name is Joe Armstrong, and I'm the president of Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 1044, located in Biddeford. On today's show, first I'd like to talk to my fellow veterans of my generation and before, as well as our citizens and dependents. The second part of our show is for our returning veterans of today. American troops in Vietnam, when talking about home, referred to home as the world. Ergo, the title of my perspective. When our warriors come home, they did, as we did, find that the world that they fought for, the world that they loved and dreamed of, had somehow changed. Over the last several years, every time I would meet one of our returning warriors, both men and women, I would stop and talk to them. After a few minutes, we would connect. They knew I got it. And many of the things we would talk about are covered in my perspective. I wrote it for them, America's newest, greatest generation. They are the 1% that always showed up, and every one of them is a volunteer. Yes, 100% volunteer. And talk about great, you bet they are. Our current military has coined an amazing little tidbit they call ground truth. It separates reality from the political truth, the media truth, and the society's truth. Ground truth is determined by those whose boots were actually on the ground. When I look back at my experience coming home and the experience of those returning home from today's wars, we share many common, painful readjustment issues. Back to the world is the ground truth, designed to shed a little understanding, awareness, and most of all, hope to all those who face death for us every day. The readjustment issue of our returning warriors are directly tied not only to their combat experience, the psychic horror, if you will, but to the American society that contains a stigmatized to those who seek help for any psychological traumas. Yes, we as a society discourage our heroes from seeking support when they need it. Sorry about the heroes stuff. They don't like to be called heroes. I never met a hero who did. A human being would have to be a little bit of a psychopath to experience war and walk away without some residual psychological consequences. You agree? Our stigmatizing attitude towards emotional problems seems to be an intellectual error beyond the scope of reason. It is amazing when one considers the number of Americans who, for emotional reasons, self-medicate with alcohol and drugs. Addictions like gambling, obsessive shopping, overeating, and workaholic behaviors are just a few of the things we do to escape our pain. Child and spouse abuse, road rage, and other issues are daily news items, yet in many cases, the only help people get is usually out of desperation or court-ordered. Remember where you were when you heard about the terrorist attack in 9/11? I'll bet you can remember every detail of what you were doing at that moment you heard about it. Us older folks can just as clearly tell you what we were doing when we heard JFK was assassinated. For those of you too young to remember, those events just substitute one of your own bad memories, and you'll see how adrenaline permanently burns events into our memories. If one memory, like 9/11, can stay with us forever, imagine what burned in the memories of our warriors who fought day and night on the bloody killing fields of war. Adrenaline pumping continuously into combat burns a library of memories permanently stored by a confused and overloaded unconsciousness brain. The unconsciousness brain never sleeps and speaks in a different language. We need professionals to help decipher it all. We cannot do this by ourselves. In the movie Saving Private Ryan, we can all recall Tom Hanks' right hand trembling uncontrollable from the first frames of the movie. The fear of death produces adrenaline, and adrenaline causes his hand to shake. When his hand stopped shaking, we knew he had died of his wounds. We totally got why his hand shook. The primal wisdom in us understood what caused the shaking, and we accepted it completely. For a brief time, we were connected to the warriors and to the confusion found in the fog of war. We felt their pain, grief, fear, loss, and even perhaps some of our own adrenaline flowing during the film. When we left in the theater, almost immediately, these emotional connections started to separate from our awareness. Our warriors are unable to separate from their experience after leaving the theater of war. It's not a movie they can walk away from. It runs 24/7 somewhere in their unconscious brain and pops up in their thoughts when they least expect it. When we support our counselors, we can learn why memories pop up, where they come from, and how important and how to cope with them. In the process, we gain understanding, awareness, and most of all, wisdom. This is a wisdom the meek of heart will never know. This dark knowledge offers us the opportunity to understand ourselves and learn about the psychological complexities of the human element. Psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, therapists, and counselors are professional specialists in this field. Stop. I can see you running from the door already. I think for a moment about your reaction to getting the kind of help. Quite a boundary we place on ourselves and our troops. I must add that I was a grievous offender when it came to the stigmatizing ways ignorance is not bliss. As a society, we accept the idea of getting professional help when we need it. Who among us would try to pull their own wisdom teeth? When we're sick, we see a primary care doctor. We have teachers and professionals teaching our children. We hire lawyers when we need them. We hire plumbers, electricians, and carpenters when we need work done. But when we think of losing our minds, depression, angry, anxious, sleep deprived, and having flashbacks, we decide to ignore it all. We find ourselves drinking more, not going out unless we have to, and isolating ourselves from even those we love. Nightmares increase at night, and we all get revved up at the slightest disappointment. We stay revved up longer and longer as time goes by, but we learn to live with it. And after all, we were trained to suck it up and keep going. We remain ignorant of the collateral damage we are creating around us and choke down memories when they insist on intruding. Some of us become very adept at suppressing memories, but this too comes with a high cost in the collateral damage arena. We accommodate our anxiety and fears by bunkering up and becoming pretty much antisocial. Relationships with us can become a high-maintenance endeavor for our friends and families. They learn to live around our quirky peccadillos and comfort zones, but the cost is high for all involved. Our children will pick up all our fears, anxieties, and habits if we don't choose to deal with them. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, the modern interpretation of a coined in the middle 1970s. It came about due to the alarming number of Vietnam veterans having severe anxiety and other combat-related issues. Why? A reasonable question. The answer is twofold. One, the helicopter changed the way the troops were carried into battle. Troops were transported into enemy territory very quickly and ferried from one battlefield to another on a daily basis. The warriors exposed to combat was increased 400% in comparison to their World War II counterparts. Number two, Congress decided that a limited tour of duty would limit each warrior's exposure to war by placing a time limit on their deployment. The military, in order to complete its assigned missions, had to utilize these troops continuously with very little or no relief for the combatants. The consequences were devastating. Every citizen who went into the military since Vietnam has had the same combat tour utilization and even higher speed deployments. When we entered the draft, our all-volunteer military was reconfigured and reduced in size. This put increased stress on our military and our warriors, who had been engaged in numerous conflicts and wars around the world since the 1970s. Our troops are in continuous combat situations. Year after year, they're being deployed and redeployed over and over again. Stressing the human element, you bet. Do the math. For your information, the air mobility strategy in Vietnam was supported by 12,000 helicopters flying multiple missions every day. South Vietnam was smaller in size than the state of Oklahoma. Excuse me. I see three basic forms of intelligence we rely on: intellectual, emotional, and primal. Our combat veterans all understood and learned to depend on their primal instincts, the lizard brain, if you will. Survival, in part, depended on listening to it. So remember, when you talk to a veteran, you may be talking to a genius in disguise. To find this wisdom on campus, sit next to a veteran. Audie Murphy was the most decorated hero in American history. His exploits in World War II were unimaginable. He suffered from acute anxiety and, after the war, what is now known as PTSD. And in the agony of his suffering, he had him considering suicide to escape the emotional pain. He called his best friend with a loaded .45 caliber pistol in his hand to say goodbye. His friend told him to go ahead and give every kid that admired him permission to do the same. Audie called him a name and put the pistol away. He spent the rest of his life bringing public attention to PTSD and encouraging his fellow veterans to get help when they needed it. Suicide can be a pseudo form of generic permission to our children and others to do the same things when the things get tough. When veterans who have suicidal thoughts hear these facts, they always reject suicide as an option. It's amazing how veterans who will not do things for themselves will sacrifice everything for another veteran or someone they love. With that in mind, let us follow this order from the American hero, Lieutenant Audie L. Murphy. It was his last order to us, and it is a ground truth. A major problem is not only getting the younger veterans to go for help, but getting them to continue the process once they do. Part of the reason is they see so many older veterans still suffering with PTSD. It's disheartening for them to visualize themselves still having problems 40 years down the road. What they don't grasp at the time is that these older veterans never went for help. Number one, there was the stigma none of us were able to overcome. Number two is that the treatment available back then was significantly less sophisticated or effective. PTSD can surface in months or years, sometimes decades, so become aware of the symptoms. Additional proof of our unconscious mind need to solve our problems has happened to all of us. We have all gone to bed with a problem unsolved, and many times the solution just seems to come out of nowhere in the middle of the night. When it can't solve the problem, it starts pumping out dreams or nightmares. The dreams are usually strange in nature. When we think about them the next morning, there seems to be no logical explanation for them. This is the language of our unconscious mind. When we have flashbacks of our war traumas, usually something's triggered it. The unconscious mind remembers the original version all too well, and it tries to warn us in its own strange little way. Its primary function is to keep us alive. It could care less about the fact that it can make us feel like we're losing sanity along the way. We make most of our decisions based on emotions. We fall in love, buy houses and cars based on our emotional urges. We have emotional responses to just about everything from politics to the Super Bowl yet rarely look at the science of the human behavior. Even when we're in great emotional pain, we never think to utilize the professionals who have the answers. Yes, it is a science. Yes, there are answers, and yes, you'll feel a whole lot better when you understand what you're going through is a totally normal human response to trauma. If my thoughts will convince just one of you to consider getting some support instead of suffering alone, it's a prayer answered for me. As you recall, support is critical in combat. You probably called for air, artillery, ground, or medical support every day. Support when you need it, whether it's on the battlefield or at home, is a critical cost of survival. The treatment for PTSD today is very sophisticated. You can change the trauma of your war experience into a wisdom that will serve you well for the rest of your life. The lesson here is that if we don't address these issues, we will modify our behaviors to accommodate our fears and anxieties. We will become more and more disabled as the years go by. Our brain adjusts brain plasticity to the hypervigilance, isolation, social avoidance, anger, paranoia, and other obsessive behaviors will tend to develop without proper treatment. PTSD will migrate from an acute condition to a chronic disability if left untreated. This is true of any serious injury. If we break a leg, we get it set by a doctor. If we choose to go untreated, it has devastating consequences. So our newer veterans' fear can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If they ignore the symptoms of PTSD as we did, that's the ground truth. Now I'd like to share my perspective with our veterans returning from war today. I returned from Vietnam in June of 1967. I served with the United States Army 173rd Airborne Brigade. I had just turned 19 years old. I spent the next 27 years bewildered by emotional impact of war and its influence on my life. Excuse me. I offer my views to let our returning warriors know that they can learn to cope with the issues of readjustment. My hope, a prayer in fact, is that you won't wait 27 years to do it. When the warriors return home, they find their world has changed. Their country has not. Society seems naive, self-consumed, and aggressive. The combat veteran has experienced violence at a level similar to that of the insect world. Fear and anger, felt by all human beings, has become their most familiar and reliable emotions. Excuse me. The fear has become modified and controlled and drives the adrenal push necessary for a fight response. If you startle an animal, it jumps 3 feet in the air. The fear of death is the ultimate motivator. The fight or flight response that all humans have is activated when we are threatened. Life-changing decisions have to be made in less than a heartbeat. The warrior is conditioned to ignore the flight option in almost all combat situations. Fight summons all their skills and discipline, and anger replaces the instinct to flee. Anger and fear serve the warrior well. Instant response, focus, and strength at their disposal. Returning veterans have a dark knowledge not known to many of their neighbors. They remain just like they were when they were left for combat. In fact, if you were perhaps just as naive prior to your combat experiences, most of us recall our months of combat, how depressing it was to have a new replacement join the unit. In a way, they knew nothing of what was to come. It pained you to think of what they had yet to learn, if they were lucky. This replacement was conditioned and trained, yet your heart went out to them for the dark knowledge about to be learned. If this trained and conditioned replacement brought such discomfort to you, imagine trying to explain your dark knowledge to the typical American citizen back here in the world. It can't be done, so don't frustrate yourself trying. It is part of the price you have to pay for fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. Find comfort in the fact you have contributed to protecting them for what you now know. You are what I refer to as one of gets it crowd. An average American is what I call the don't get it crowd. In the combat zone where you fought, the citizens got it. How could they not? They may not have gotten it like you did, but they got it in some level. Agreed? You have to develop a whole new set of coping skills to survive our new, old America, starting with a first do no harm kind of oath the doctors take. I'm sure you'll agree that the most painful war experiences was friendly fire. Friendly fire is inevitable in any and all wars, past and present. It turns one's stomach to recall such incidents. Use this memory and tolerate those sometimes aggressive and self-consumed friends. Think of driving down the highway and someone cuts you off or gets in your space or follows too close. These I call stupid friendlies. They put anyone in a rage with their aggressive behavior. Don't let this happen to you. Give them some space. You risked your life protecting these friendlies, so let them go on their way. The rest of America thinks aggressive drivers are stupid as well. I put a sticky note on my dashboard that says stupid friendlies. It reminds me where I am, and affirmations are a good way to let you cope. Be patient with the don't get it crowds. Remember, almost every one of you love belonging to the don't get it crowd. While your experience has changed your core values, this world has stayed the same. When you came home, it was like a 30-year-old going back to high school. You feel out of place, or is it them? You become socially uncomfortable with them, and them with you. You startle at any noise, you avoid social events, or would just assume bunker up. Aggressive drivers threaten you. Drivers like that in the war zone were trying to kill you. But these folks don't get it. How could they? If someone asks you if you killed anyone, don't be shocked. People ask questions. I call them the naive friendlies. They're in the I don't get it crowd. All people have morbid curiosity, and they are curious about your experience. You can come up with your own coping skills when these type of questions are asked. Myself, I smile and advise them, you should never ask a war veteran a question like that. I compare it to asking them about their most devastating childhood experience. Remember, they probably ask out of respect. If you find yourself thinking about the war in an uncomfortable way, write it down. Keep a pen and paper in your pocket at all times. When I have a memory, I jot it down. I have found they are usually significant and need to be dealt with. The subconscious mind talks in a different language, and trying to interpret it by yourself is impossible. Veteran groups are the answer to hashing out your memories of war. Number one, you'll be with the Get You crowd, and you'll be learning coping skills and experience of other veterans. You'll be amazed at how normal most of your responses are to your experience. There will be times when you think you're losing your mind. Only to find out you are having a totally human response to traumatic situations. Counselors are trained to guide you through the process. They have the knowledge of the subconscious battlefield to the same extent you had on the battlefields of war. Veteran groups are very beneficial, more so when a pro is with you along them. Trust me on this one. The human brain, the world, is powerful and complex computer, has no user manual. We have to learn its language. When you find yourself not wanting to go to a party with your old friends, don't fret. Your perspective has changed. They still enjoy the good times they had before you left. You've been born again hard, and the old rituals now seem childish and uninteresting. Your dark knowledge lets you see light more clearly. You are now emotionally a generation ahead of your friends. Accept it and move on with your hard-earned wisdom. Your loved ones are another story. Talk to them. Set boundaries that are healthy and explain your experience to them the best you can. Some coping skills like wake me from a distance, light the hallway at night if they are up. Startling you in the dark is not a good idea. Have them make it known when they approach you from behind and understand when you need some time alone. Adjust your threat assessment from a war zone to home. No easy task, but you can learn to cope. I find notes help the most. They help the front lobe focus and stay grounded in today. Affirmations help a lot. Stupid friendlies, zero expectations, tactical breathing. You get the idea. You're coming home from a war zone where one mistake can mean death. The society around you, for the most part, thinks it will live forever. If they eat the right cereals, this is a huge gap for you to straddle every day. But things like writing poetry, art, and music therapy will help you. Anger management courses helped me a lot. I actually didn't think I had anger issues. The fact was, I did and couldn't see it for myself. Imagine image defense is a powerful negative force that can block learning and development. The classic high school football hero comes to mind. If they can't move on to the next level, many of them are shattered, in many ways broken. This is known as arrest development. One lives on the adrenaline of combat memories and resists move on. This has happened to me and many other veterans. We become emotionally paralyzed by the war. We can never seem to leave behind. Remember, it's okay to look back, but don't stare. It's a negative side of the dark wisdom, and it isn't helpful or productive. Trust me on this. Excuse me. Survivor's guilt is a demon many veterans take upon themselves unjustifiably. The fog of war is just that, and many aspects of life and death on the battlefield are random. IED, mortars, RPGs, and even firefights are uncontrollable events to the warrior. When you survive and your comrade who was with you is killed or wounded, you want to control the uncontrollable. You can't accept the lack of control in this nightmare, so you take on the guilt to give you some sense of control. You suffer with it, you own it, it's yours, and you're back in control. You have to accept the fact that some things in war, or in life for that matter, you have no control of at all. So please cut this demon adrift. Whatever made you grab on, it's not your fault. Grief is a human emotion. So let go of the guilt, and you will finally be able to grieve. We all tell ourselves stories that support our self-image and beliefs, but in fact, most of the stories we tell ourselves are not true. Survivor's guilt is one example. There are hundreds of coping skills to be learned. When you're ready to hear them, there are counselors to guide you through it. Think of them as combat medics or corpsmen. They have dusted me off more than once. I truly hope my thoughts will help you readjust. You are the 1% that show up and keep America safe. You volunteer and sacrifice and are the pride of our nation. America needs your leadership now more than ever. Your experience is unique, your vision is based on reality, and you are tempered by war. Your work ethics is unquestionable, and your discipline is admired. So like the old saying goes, lead on or follow me. Thanks for your service and welcome home. America and its veterans are very, very proud of you. I know it's a lot to digest right now, so if you'd like a printed copy of what we have discussed here today, or any of our shows, please email me at president@vva1044maine.org with your mailing address, and I will send you a copy. And to all of you I say, don't give up the good fight, and thank you.